In the ultra-luxurious heights of a Manhattan penthouse, money can buy almost anything. It can buy loyalty, it can buy silence, and sometimes it can even buy the perfect murder. To the New York Police Department, the death of Richard Sterling, a 70-year-old real estate titan, was an impossible paradox. Richard was found dead inside his private, impenetrable, steel-reinforced panic room. He had been stabbed directly in the chest. But here was the terrifying problem. The heavy steel door was electronically locked from the inside. There were no windows, there were no secret passages, and most importantly, there was no weapon found anywhere in the room. No knife, no gun, no glass, nothing. Richard's young, glamorous wife, Evelyn, and his lead architect, Marcus, stood outside the vault, playing the roles of the devastated widow and the shocked friend perfectly. They told the police it must have been a bizarre suicide, claiming Richard somehow disposed of the weapon. The police were baffled, ready to close the case as an unsolved anomaly. But there was one man who didn't believe in ghosts, and he certainly didn't believe in impossible rooms. His name was Elias. He wasn't a detective. He was a master climate control engineer, the man who had designed the ventilation systems for Richard's buildings. Evelyn and Marcus thought they had executed a masterpiece of architectural deception. They thought their secret was safe, but they forgot one fundamental rule of the universe. Matter cannot be destroyed. It only changes form. And Elias is about to prove that while Evelyn and Marcus designed a flawless room, they couldn't outsmart the laws of thermodynamics. The story begins a year before the murder. Richard was a billionaire, but he was also a paranoid man. He trusted no one, especially not his young wife, Evelyn, whose love for his bank accounts far outweighed her love for him. To ensure his safety and protect his most valuable documents, Richard hired Marcus, a brilliant high-end architect, to build a state-of-the-art panic room inside the penthouse. Marcus designed a masterpiece, a room with 10-inch thick steel walls, an independent power supply, and a biometric lock that could only be opened from the inside once sealed. But Marcus wasn't just building a room, he was building a relationship with Evelyn. While Richard was busy running his empire, Evelyn and Marcus were busy running an affair. They wanted Richard's $2 billion estate, but a divorce would leave Evelyn with a tiny fraction of that wealth due to an ironclad prenuptial agreement. They needed him dead, but Richard was too well guarded and his food was strictly monitored. They realized that the only place Richard was truly vulnerable was the one place he felt safest, the panic room. Marcus knew every inch of that room. He knew it was airtight. He knew it was soundproof. But to kill a man inside a locked vault and leave no trace of the killer or the weapon, they needed an assassin that would simply disappear. The night of the murder coincided with Richard's 70th birthday gala, hosted in the grand ballroom of the penthouse. Hundreds of wealthy guests were drinking champagne, providing Evelyn and Marcus with the ultimate alibi. At exactly midnight, Richard, feeling tired, excused himself and went up to his private vault to secure some business documents. Evelyn and Marcus slipped away from the party just long enough to follow him. Before Richard could completely shut the heavy steel door, Marcus forced his way inside, dragging Evelyn with him. The struggle was brief. Marcus held Richard down while Evelyn drove the weapon directly into his chest. Richard collapsed. Evelyn and Marcus quickly wiped their hands, exited the room, and used Richard's own hand to press the biometric lock from the inside just before pulling the door completely shut. The heavy bolts engaged. The room was sealed. They returned to the party, smiling, drinking, and securing their alibi. 3 hours later, when Richard didn't return, Evelyn dramatically called security. They had to drill through the concrete wall to bypass the lock. When the police finally broke in, they found Richard dead, the room locked from the inside, and absolutely no weapon. The perfect locked room mystery was born. A week passed. The police were paralyzed. They searched every inch of the vault. They x-rayed the walls. They sifted through the carpets. Nothing. Evelyn was already meeting with lawyers to transfer the billion-dollar estate into her name. Marcus was preparing to move into the penthouse, but Elias couldn't sleep. Richard had been a mentor to him. Elias knew Richard would never commit suicide, and as an engineer, Elias knew that impossible puzzles were just equations that hadn't been solved yet. Elias convinced the lead detective to let him examine the panic room. He didn't look at the blood. He didn't look at the door. He looked up. He looked at the independent HVAC system, the climate control unit that Marcus had installed to keep the room oxygenated. Elias stood in the center of the room. The temperature was set to a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit. He closed his eyes and thought about the paradox. A man is stabbed. The room is locked. The weapon is missing. If it didn't leave the room, Elias muttered to himself, then it must still be here. But how does a weapon disappear in a 72-degree room? And then, the logic hit him like a lightning bolt. It didn't walk out, it melted. Elias realized the brilliance of the crime. Evelyn and Marcus hadn't used a steel knife or a glass shard. They had used water. They had meticulously frozen a concentrated block of water in a custom, razor-sharp silicone mold, creating an ice dagger. It was hard enough to pierce human flesh. But once the deed was done and the room was locked at 72 degrees, the ice dagger was left on the floor. Over the next 3 hours, while Evelyn and Marcus were downstairs drinking champagne, the ice dagger slowly melted into a small puddle of water. And because the panic room was highly climate-controlled, the dry air of the dehumidifier quickly evaporated that small puddle. By the time the police broke the door down, the weapon had completely vanished into thin air. It was a flawless execution of thermodynamics, but Elias was a master of the very same science. He knew that while water evaporates, it doesn't truly disappear. It gets recycled. Elias quickly grabbed a ladder and opened the heavy ceiling panel to access the panic room's independent air conditioning unit. Every AC unit has a condensation drip pan, a place where the moisture pulled from the air collects before being pumped outside. Elias extracted a small vial of water from the drip pan. To a normal detective, it was just dirty condensation. But to Elias, it was the murder weapon. He took the vial straight to a forensic chemistry lab. He knew that normal condensation from human breath or ambient air is essentially distilled water. It is pure H2O. But Evelyn was a woman of extreme, obsessive luxury. Elias remembered that Evelyn only ever drank one specific type of water, an ultra-expensive, imported artisanal mineral water from a volcanic spring in Iceland. It was heavily infused with rare silica and magnesium. Elias ran the condensation water through a mass spectrometer. He waited for 3 agonizing hours. Finally, the results printed out. The water in the AC drip pan wasn't pure. It contained massive concentrated spikes of volcanic silica and magnesium, the exact chemical signature of Evelyn's imported luxury water. The ice dagger had melted, evaporated, and been sucked into the AC unit, leaving its rare minerals trapped in the filter and the drip pan. The melted weapon had just become the star witness. The next morning, Evelyn and Marcus were sitting in the grand penthouse library, signing the final estate transfer papers with their corporate lawyers. They were seconds away from inheriting $2 billion. The heavy oak doors swung open. Elias walked in, followed by 3 homicide detectives. Elias wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a small sealed glass vial of water. Evelyn rolled her eyes. Elias, what is the meaning of this? We are in the middle of a private legal meeting. Marcus stood up, puffing his chest. You need to leave. The police have already closed the investigation. It was a suicide. Elias didn't blink. He placed the small glass vial on the mahogany table right in front of Evelyn. It wasn't a suicide, Marcus, Elias said, his voice cold and echoing through the quiet library. It was an architectural masterpiece, an airtight room, a solid alibi, and a weapon that literally disappeared into thin air. Evelyn's fake confidence twitched. I have no idea what you're talking about. Elias leaned over the table, staring directly into Evelyn's eyes. You used an ice dagger, Elias said, the words hitting the room like a physical blow. You stabbed him, locked the room, and let the 72-degree ambient temperature melt the evidence while you drank champagne downstairs. By the time the police broke in, the weapon had evaporated. Marcus laughed, though his hands were slightly trembling. That's a ridiculous theory, Elias. You have absolutely no proof. You can't arrest someone over evaporated water. You're right, Marcus. I can't, Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But I can arrest you for what the water left behind. Elias pointed to the glass vial. Every AC unit collects moisture. Normal moisture is pure, but the moisture I pulled from the panic room's filter yesterday wasn't pure. It was loaded with rare volcanic silica. Elias looked at the case of expensive Icelandic water sitting on Evelyn's desk. "You didn't use tap water to make your weapon, Evelyn. You used your own private imported luxury brand. The water evaporated, but the heavy minerals didn't. They were trapped in the filter. You didn't just leave a murder weapon in that room. You left a chemical fingerprint." The room fell into a dead, horrifying silence. The corporate lawyers slowly pushed their chairs away from the table. Evelyn's face turned the color of ash. She looked at Marcus, panic completely taking over her features. Marcus stepped back, his architectural arrogance collapsing in an instant. He had calculated the melting time, the room temperature, and the lock mechanism, but he had forgotten the chemistry of the air. "You can't prove who held the ice," Evelyn screamed, her glamorous facade completely breaking down into desperate terror. "We don't have to," the lead detective said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "The financial motive, the affair, and the rare minerals are enough for a jury to lock you both away for the rest of your lives." The detectives grabbed Marcus and Evelyn. The clinking of the handcuffs was the only sound in the massive penthouse. Evelyn's $2 billion dream was shattered by a few drops of water. Elias picked up his glass vial. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just watched the billionaires get dragged out of the empire they tried to steal. "You thought you were architects of the perfect crime," Elias said quietly to the empty room. "But you forgot that physics doesn't take bribes. In a world that is obsessed with perfect crimes, flawless execution, and outsmarting the system, we often forget that the universe keeps its own records." Evelyn and Marcus thought they could use intellect and luxury to mask their greed. They thought they could commit a brutal act and let it melt away into history. They thought the world would only see the mystery and never question the moisture. But Elias taught us a different lesson. You can lock a door, but you can't lock away the truth. You can melt the weapon, but you can never erase the elements it leaves behind. Evelyn and Marcus chose wealth over humanity, and their perfect plan evaporated, leaving nothing but the hard, undeniable evidence of their guilt. Remember, a lie might disappear from plain sight, but if you look close enough, the truth is always hovering in the air. Never underestimate the quiet professionals who understand how the world actually works. Because when the ego melts away, science and justice will always remain solid.